Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
This is Mark Gunn Media.
Hit it! Welcome to Gunshots Straight from the Hip. I'm your host, Mark Gunn. The views expressed on this program are those of the host and guests and not necessarily reflective of anyone or any entity associated with this broadcast. This episode brought to you by Before Your First Gig, an audiobook written by Steve Dustcircle and produced by Mark Gunn Media. If you're a beginning musician, this is a primer that you'll definitely want to hear. Tips and strategies for setting yourself up for live performances and paid gigs. Before Your First Gig by Steve Dustcircle. Available now on iTunes, Audible.com, and Amazon. Before Your First Gig by Steve Dustcircle. Produced by Mark Gunn Media. This episode, radio killed the radio star. Hey, welcome to the first podcast of 2020, and you've probably heard over the last week or so about the some 3,000 employees that were unceremoniously fired by iHeart Media.
iHeart Media, mostly music radio, said this week it was laying off 30% of its workforce nationwide, abruptly removing the blogs and bios of some of its biggest personalities.
I cannot believe we're still talking about this. Yeah. They told us not to.
iHeart thinks everyone is expendable.
Now, as a former radio personality and program director, I took this kind of personally because I have quite a few friends that were affected by these cuts. And this isn't the first time this has happened either. iHeart Media is one of the largest conglomerates in the world, and it's not by accident.
The original sin was committed late at night in 1996. Tacked onto an otherwise unrelated telecom act was radio deregulation. And the simple story is that one company had a ration of stations they were allowed to own, a dozen, and no more than 4 in one city. Now, one company could own as many stations as they want. They can now have as many as 8 in one city, so it became a seller's market. And local radio, the beloved mom and pop independent operators that made radio so delightfully local, probably had no intention of selling. They're all down in West Palm now because along came Clear Channel, now called iHeart, and some of the other big groups who wildly overpaid in this feeding frenzy. And ever since, they've been burning the furniture to keep the lights on because the mortgage is just untenable. And that's why it's hard to find local news or local DJs on a lot of AM/FM stations.
Many of us who've been in the business for over 30 years remember when the idea of deregulation was being pushed. The goal was to allow broadcast companies to own as many radio stations as they could get their grubby little hands on. At the time, industry insiders were trying to sell the benefits of such a move.
I think one thing that the deregulation does is probably strengthen the financial viability of radio as an industry. And if that financial viability is strengthened, then the future is a little more secure and broadcasters can do a better job of serving the general public.
There were also those in the FCC that saw benefit as well.
In some cases, it's been a salvation of some radio stations. They needed the help from others. In some cases, it made for a more efficient, effective operation.
Even then, part of the rationale was a fear of other media hurting radio financially.
It is unfair that somebody could go tomorrow into direct satellite broadcasting and immediately be able to talk to multiple stations in multiple markets across the United States, yet the same FCC tells us as an industry that we can own 2 AMs and 2 FMs in a limited number of markets. It doesn't make any sense. We are firm believers in raising the ownership limits and let the marketplace take care of itself.
Meanwhile, veteran programmers like myself saw the dangers of deregulation.
There is this danger, and that is that some of the large dominant players will dominate a market.
We were being told within the halls of our radio stations that consolidation would be good for all of us as personalities.
You have, in many cases, complete competitors who have been at each other's throats for years, now swarm together in one building, one company, all with a united front in theory, but in many ways still competing with each other.
And good for the listeners. However,
well, when it comes to average citizens, they're saying, no, stop. We think big media is already big enough. We want more local media. We want more diversity in our media, and we want more media choices. 90%, 95% of the comments that you're hearing from the public say, stop. We don't want to see these handful of companies get even more powerful.
A lot of us saw this for the load of crap that it was. Fast forward 10 to 20 years later, and because of a handful of companies owning the majority of stations, the quality of programming has greatly diminished. Local personalities are being replaced by syndicated radio shows that have absolutely no connection to the communities that they serve.
This is about the connection with the community.
What's scarier is that they're going to mush together some kind of generic thing which they feed out.
Despite their predictions about profit margins increasing over time, radio revenue has been in steady decline for the last 10 years.
People think this is dumb. It's not dumb because they don't see themselves as being in the radio business long term. No. They're squeezing as much profits as they can out of these stations for a few years, and then they're going to walk away.
These companies are learning the hard way that consolidation is a very expensive proposition, especially when you don't have the revenues to back it up.
But it also is a sign of the weight on the radio industry. The kinds of salaries that some of the big radio folks got back in the day, you're not seeing those anymore because there's a lot of financial pressures on the whole radio system. And part of that, and we all listen to podcasts, right? And that's kind of what's I think at play with radio, where anyone can develop a lot of interesting programming at a fraction of the cost, and the distribution doesn't cost anything. And so I think radio is competing against podcasting, or podcasting is the enemy here. And what you're finding is some radio stations are now incorporating podcasts into the radio programming in order to cut down on costs.
What ends up happening is the very people these companies depend on to turn a profit, its on-air personalities, are the ones that are getting kicked to the curb.
There's no DJ being paid or morning personality being paid to bring that to me.
Take the case of a friend of mine who was forced out of his very popular morning show some 12 years ago.
Bad news for fans of one of Baltimore's most popular morning radio shows. As Derek Valcourt explains, a move to save money will eliminate a fan favorite at 92Q.
The bottom line is, though, you are responsible for your actions.
The last time you heard 92Q's Big Fat Morning Show was the last time you heard it. Today, Radio 1, the company that owns Baltimore's most popular hip-hop and R&B station, announced they were letting go of morning DJ Mark Clark, canceling his show and replacing it with a syndicated show. The news, a bummer to some of the station's biggest fans.
I think it's really, really ridiculous because I really love that guy.
That's what people need in the mornings, especially when they just waking up. A nice good old laughter about, you say the Ravens game or just something that took place in entertainment.
It was entertaining. I found it entertaining each time, just driving to school, listening to the music.
Every one of the disappointed radio listeners we talked to asked the same question. What for? 92Q General Manager Howard Mazer answers the change was a corporate decision, part of cost-cutting measures designed to save the station bucks. Fans think it's a bad move.
I have no idea why would they do that, especially because he is so popular and it's kind of like a staple. For somebody to just up and get rid of them. I don't know. That doesn't make any sense.
Fortunately for Mark and a few others, they've been able to stay in business and are doing well. Others, not so much. Saving money. Cost cutting. Just two of the phrases you'll hear as to why iHeart and other media conglomerates are firing people en masse. In iHeart's case, they're heavily invested in artificial intelligence and other so-called technological advances in order to operate leaner and meaner. Within the last 2 years, there's been an increase in online advertising and a decrease in traditional on-air buys. One of the reasons I've maintained for a while that there's nothing that can take the place of live and local programming and the diversity of those local voices.
Even though there's 300 channels on satellite and cable, there's still less diversity than there used to be because so few companies control so many of those channels, and there's just 5 or 6 companies in America that dominate the media landscape, the giant multinational conglomerates. So there may be a lot of different voices, but they're coming from the same ventriloquist. What we need is to enhance diversity, to make sure there are as many voices as possible so that people can make up their own minds about decisions of the day.
Corporate radio has simply demonstrated that it cannot do that effectively.
When we look at satellite radio and streaming and all the consolidation taking place, I mean, is it inevitable we're going down this road to bigger is supposedly better? Have we lost local content forever?
Well, the timing couldn't have been worse for big corporate radio to dumb down the local programming. It was the perfect storm. iPod was the shiny object back then. Now we have Sirius XM, which you mentioned, Pandora, streaming, downloads. There was never a more important time for broadcasters to do something unique, to be local.
iHeart and other conglomerates will tell you that radio listenership is as strong as it ever was. Take that with a grain of salt, because the method of calculating those figures is as controversial as the companies themselves. Some studies show that overall listenership has declined by close to 1 million people since 2017. Coming up, I'll answer some of the most frequently asked questions I hear about radio, and I'll tell you the other reason why radio killed the radio star. Right after this. As a business owner, one of your biggest concerns is marketing your products and services. What message do I want to send? Who am I sending the message to? How do I reach the largest number of them possible? And how do I make it cost effective? The answer to all of these questions is Mark Gunn Media Inc. With over 3 decades of multimedia experience, from producing your commercial to giving you a winning strategy to market your business, Mark Gunn Media Inc. uses its years of knowledge and skill to help get the best possible outcome. Just ask any of the clients we've worked with before, and they'll tell you that Mark Gunn Media gets results. For more information, call Mark Gunn Media at 502-205-2085 or 502-407-0283. That's 502-205-2085 or 502-407-0283.
Mark Gunn Media. No hype, no hoopla, just damn good work.
For downloads of this and past episodes and information about all the multimedia services we offer, log on to our website at www.markgunmedia.com. That's markgunmedia.com. Welcome back to Gunshots Straight from the Hip, and I'm Mark Gunn. We're talking about the massive round of job cuts recently done by iHeart Media and how it affects you, the radio listener. Now, before I continue, I have to give you a little professional background, and you'll understand why I decided to tackle this topic. I'm a radio personality and program director with over 30 years of experience.
Kiss FM. Your dial is set on 102.9 Kiss FM, the home of the hottest hits. Lock it in and then rip the knob off. WNKF, Columbus,
Mississippi's Music Power 108.
Power 108, the new WZKX. She seems to have an invisible touch, especially when it comes to my one and 6:15 on the Power Station. Tonight we're going to count down the 8 most powerful songs in the land, the Power 888, and give you a chance to win. Keep listening for more details from Power 108. With Mark Gunn getting you ready for the ride home with another 45 minutes of non-stop strong songs. This hour, fresh new Nia Peoples, The Deal from the J-Lines, and this one from Jesse Johnson on the station that never plays any less than 9 in a row. Your $10,000 song of the day FM, J101.7.
Mark Gunn on WBLC, Hamilton, Cincinnati, Z103.
Mark, Kim, Jonathan, The Wiz Morning Crew on R&B Hits 100.9. The Wiz.
Good morning. Hey, Mark. You know, I love your show and everything every morning. But do y'all take y'all medication before y'all come in here?
WGZB. It's going down. Lanesville, Louisville. You are now witnessing history in the making. Celebrating 30 years in radio. You're listening to Mark Gunn in the Afternoon on B96.5.
I've worked in a variety of formats and positions at stations all over the country. Rock, top 40, country, adult contemporary, hip-hop, and R&B. I've worked here in Louisville, Kentucky, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Los Angeles, Milwaukee, and San Francisco, just to name a few. So I'm more than qualified to bring you this particular discussion. Now, before the break, I told you that I would answer some of the most frequently asked questions I get about radio. So here we go. The question I get most often is, why do radio stations play the same songs over and over again? The shorter answer is because they want to get as many of you as possible to be listening. That's what we call cume. and we want you to listen for as long as possible. That's called time spent listening. A more detailed explanation.
Radio makes their money by selling advertising. And so in order to get advertisers, to make advertisers happy, they want to have the most people listening at any given time possible. So if they have the biggest listening audience, advertisers are going to get their ads heard by the most people. So what they do is they try to play popular songs as often as possible to get those listeners listening. They assume that people are going to be listening in their cars, and then they're just going to be turning it on and pushing the button until they hear the song that they want to hear. If they push the button, the scan button, and they land on a station and it's not playing the song they want to hear, they're going to push that button again until they find that song. So it behooves radio stations to play the same songs, the really popular songs, as much as possible.
All right, so we're going to get a little inside baseball here. So to break it down even further, picture a clock divided into 4 15-minute sections making up the hour. We call those 15-minute sections quarter hours. The goal of every radio station is to get as many of you to listen to as many of those 15-minute segments as possible. Now, we know that most radio listening these days is done in the car, and the average time spent driving, depending on where you are, is about 20 to 30 minutes. Now, if my radio station can keep you as a listener for 3 out of those 4 quarter hours, that's considered a win, because that's 45 minutes that I've been able to keep you from tuning into another station. Now, traditional wisdom says that by playing your favorite songs over and over again, I've got a better chance of keeping you around for longer. However, as more stations are failing to learn, it isn't just about the music. More about that in a bit. The second question is, who decides what music gets played and why? Little history for you. Back in the 50s and 60s, early 70s, radio as you know it today was a lot different. Playlists weren't as segregated as they are today. A top 40 station back then played the best of every genre, so it wouldn't be unusual to hear, say, Jimi Hendrix played next to Conway Twitty or Burt Bacharach. Google him if you don't know who that is, okay? Now, there were different stations with different formats, to be sure, but the focus really wasn't there until years later. Over time, as audiences grew and musical tastes got more diverse, radio surmised that if it could super serve a particular type of listener, it had a better chance of increasing its profit margins. You had top 40 or pop radio, soul or R&B, country, and easy listening as the main formats back then. Music continued to diversify, and you ended up with even more narrowly focused formats. Now, how does the music get chosen, and who chooses it? Before deregulation and consolidation, record companies had to deal with one of two people, or sometimes both: the music director and the program director. Now, having been a music director, my job was to meet with the record labels and check out the new music that they were trying to push at that time. Now, based on the information I had regarding a song's early buzz and the quality of the song itself, in other words, it had to be good, based on my gut reaction, I gave my recommendations to the program director, who had the final decision as to whether or not to play the song. Today, it's a little bit different. Most of the music decisions are taken out of the program director's hands and are made at a corporate level. And a lot of it is based on a quid pro quo type of song and dance that the labels do with the radio stations, or in this case, with the corporation. No longer are program directors allowed to use their instincts. There's usually some promotional incentive behind playing a particular artist, and it's all legal. Barely. Another question I get is, do DJs get to pick their own songs? In a word, no. Back in the day, at some stations we did, but as a program director and an air talent, I like not giving the DJ the choice because it takes away from the precious 3 minutes or so that they have to plan their next break. What will he or she say that'll keep you interested enough to stick around? You ever notice that the best radio personalities are the ones that can keep you listening by what they say, more so than by what they play? My philosophy is the music and it's always going to be there. It's what you do in between the songs that really matters. Which brings me to the other culprit responsible for the death of the radio star: syndication. With the advent of consolidation, companies like iHeart Radio and Radio 1 killed the jobs of quite a few local morning shows. Personalities that you listened to for years were suddenly shown the door in favor of someone totally unknown to the audience. In a lot of cases, it didn't sit well with those listeners. Yeah, it was a way to save money, but you lost a very important connection to the community. Stations these days couldn't care less because it was all about the bottom line. Now, personally, I have a love-hate relationship with syndicated radio programming. On the one hand, it displaces a lot of really talented local personalities, and it's never as good as a local show. On the other hand, some of my oldest friends in the business have syndicated shows, and you personally want them to do well. Now, my first experience with syndication was while I was in San Francisco. I was 1/3 of a morning show called Engelman, Gunn, and the Fox.
107.7 KSOL. Good morning. It's 6:39 now.
I'm Ron.
I'm Mark.
And I'm Kelly.
We're Engelman, Gunn, and the Fox, minutes away from $1 million kazoos. And Ron,
I got one here, man. It's addressed to Dance and Dave Morales.
Oh, no.
I'm going to open it.
Ron's been in people's mail again. One of these days, you got to get nailed, dude.
Well, listen, man, it's sitting right here in front of me every Monday morning. The mail that is delivered on Saturday, they bring into the control room, and it's sitting right here, right in front of me when I get here. And you think I'm not going to open it? You're crazy.
Oh, no.
It's not right.
I don't care. I didn't.
It's not ethical.
I don't care.
Hey, wait a minute. Since when is rights and ethics have anything to do with this radio station? Ooh.
It's true.
That's Mark G-U-N-N. Okay?
Yeah, so they get it right in the unemployment section of the paper.
Really?
6:39 now.
We were replaced by some clown named Mancow Mueller, whose show was an absolute load of hot garbage. Turns out that it was cheaper to let us go in favor of a much inferior product. My second encounter with syndication, ironically, was with one of my oldest friends in the business, Tom Joyner. It was different this time because we were one of his first stations at the time, and my job was to develop a way to make the show sound as local as I possibly could. I hated that our existing morning show was gone, but I loved the opportunity to work with an old friend. I can honestly say that in Tom's case, he did syndication the right way and in the best traditions of black radio. He retired at the end of 2019.
Amen. Last day, last few minutes.
A living legend signed off the air for the last time.
It's like an end of an era.
Tom Joyner officially retired after 25 years as the host of the Tom Joyner Morning Show. But he was more than a radio host. He was the voice for the black community, from politics to promoting social causes.
He was our voice. That's what you want to do. You want to change. You want to be able to use this and change lives, and he did that.
He grew up as the son of a Tuskegee Airman in Alabama. Education was his #1 priority, promoting historically black colleges. He raised more than $65 million for his foundation to help students go to college. In the mid-'80s, he was called the Fly Jock because he flew round trip between Dallas and Chicago 5 days a week to host shows. He was the first black syndicated radio show host.
He just laid the blueprint. For me, I'm now heard in 30 cities around the country, and that's all because Tom Joyner kicked open that door.
It's now up to those he inspired to take the reins and continue his legacy of entertainment and philanthropy.
Even though he wasn't local, he worked hard with people like me to provide local elements like references to local events and stories, as well as having an on-air presence throughout the day. Tom was the model that every radio show should emulate, local or not.
I want my audience to stay woke. I want my audience to be politically active. I want my audience to vote more than just the presidential election, more than just the congressional elections, but local elections are so important, especially when it comes to prosecutors.
In some circles of black radio, people are actually blaming Tom and others for the demise of local talent. I vehemently disagree. The blame lies squarely on the shoulders of owners of these radio stations that chose to carry the syndicated programming. The blame also lies with those using their resources for other things instead of buying smaller radio stations. Did you know that out of the 10 largest radio conglomerates in the country, only 2 were founded by black people? However, for every Tom Joyner, Ricky Smiley, or Ryan Seacrest piped into your city from out of town, there remain precious few locally owned radio stations. Local radio's importance can never, ever be understated, because for many, it's the lifeline they need in order to be connected to their community.
Lon McHugh has been behind the microphone at KJLH for over 30 years.
Background music for my Mission Hills crew.
He says he knows the key to KJLH's longevity.
You have to be more about serving people than you are about making a lot of money.
McHugh says KJLH gives the African American community a voice, and that was never more true than during the 1992 riots.
I'm proud of what we did because I think we brought calm.
The station stopped playing music and just let people talk.
We let them vent. If they wanted to cry, we let them do that. If they wanted to get information about, hey, what grocery stores are still open? Heck, what grocery stores are still standing?
Radio host Levi Booker says the station's commitment to the black community starts with the boss.
He understands how we serve the community. He knows that it's a dire need for this.
He is Stevie Wonder. The music legend is the sole owner of KJLH and a strong presence on the air and in the hallways.
He loves radio, he loves his community, and he loves us.
Today's technologies mean people don't have to listen to the radio to hear their favorite song. But McHugh is confident that stations like KJLH fill a need that goes beyond a playlist.
You don't have that familiar, friendly voice saying, hey, what a great day. You know where a great place to get a pastrami sandwich? Crenshaw and Adams. Our listeners know, I know where that place is. That's local radio. So although you have all these different devices to listen to, people are still going to come back to local. And they're going to come back home. And that's the magic.
Remember what I said about local radio and local content being more than just the music? Now, there is a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to local radio ownership, but it's not in the traditional sense. I'll tell you more about that right after this. If you're an advertiser, one of the most important things about getting your message out is actually standing out from the rest of the crowd. If you're listening to this program right now, this is where you'd hear your commercial. As an exclusive sponsor of Gunshots Straight from the Hip, your commercial is professionally produced and gets a longer shelf life based on your needs. Gunshots Straight from the Hip is a unique and compelling program unlike anything else in the marketplace. Episodes are available for download on iTunes, TuneIn, and MarkGunMedia.com. And depending on how you tailor your message, the potential for new and repeat customers is that much greater. Best of all, it's extremely cost-effective. If you'd like more information on how you can be a sponsor of this broadcast, call Mark Gunn Media Inc. at 502-407-0283. That's 502-407-0283. Or log on to markgunmedia.com. For downloads of this and past episodes and information about all the multimedia services we offer, log on to our website at www.markgunmedia.com. That's markgunmedia.com. Welcome back to Gunshots Straight from the Hip. I'm Mark Gunn. We've been talking about the massive layoffs of some 3,000 employees by iHeart Media this week and the effect it has on you, the local listener. We've also been talking about the importance of local radio ownership and how it serves its community. While it is important, it's totally meaningless if your station is out of touch.
Well, just as in World War II, this country could use its news media to propagandize and make the whole American public love the Germans and the Japanese, rather love the Russians and the Chinese and hate the Germans and the Japanese. And then after the war, they changed it and made the American public love the Germans and love the Japanese, hate the Russians and hate the Chinese, which shows that they can make the American public love whom they will and hate whom they will. And that same process can be used to re-educate the American public and show white people how to love black people and show black people how to do something to stand on our own feet and solve our own problems.
Case in point, I did a morning show for a legendary black-owned radio station in Pittsburgh around the time of the original Million Man March.
They poured off buses from Baltimore, Richmond, Syracuse, Norfolk, and all across the country. By midday, they filled the Washington Mall, from the U.S. Capitol all the way to the Washington Monument, a stunning sight. They heard from scores of black leaders and from the poet Maya Angelou. And at day's end, they heard from the man who called them here, Louis Farrakhan.
But the real evil in America is not white flesh or black flesh The real evil in America is the idea that undergirds the setup of the Western world. And that idea is called white supremacy.
It would have been ideal for my crew to go to D.C. for that weekend, but it just wasn't in the budget. I understood that, didn't have any issues. However, the biggest slap in the face came when we were told that in no uncertain terms that we were not to talk about the march the following Monday out of fear of offending our Jewish clients. The biggest event in Black America since the Civil Rights Movement, and my morning show had to not talk about it out of monetary concerns. I never got over that, and I ended up leaving the station, ironically, on Martin Luther King Day the following January. On a brighter note, the light at the end of the tunnel isn't a train. In fact, it's an increasing amount of online radio stations, and in the case of the Black community, a way for us to ensure that we continue to control our narrative and tell our stories. However, as with any media entity, the quality of the product has to be there. There are a few online radio stations that are doing really well, and there's some not so much. People are running operations that clearly don't know what they're doing. They have a perception of how radio works, and that's what they're going on. It's not right, and it's up to them to seek guidance from those of us that have actually been in the business. Now, I've offered the services of Mark Gunn Media to a couple of these properties, and it appears that they just simply aren't ready to take themselves seriously. And that's another story for another podcast. When it comes to consolidation, deregulation, and frankly, hubris, companies like iHeart Media won't realize how badly they've screwed up until it's too late.
I believe that as these big companies begin to de-lever, they're going to sell the smallest markets first, and things have a way of working out, and that there will be a new generation of mom and pop independent broadcasters who resume the local programming that made AM/FM radio so special.
Local radio has the potential of making a comeback in a big way. So if you've ever wanted to own a radio station, start getting your resources together. So I've got a feeling that a whole lot of stations will be up for sale fairly soon. You've been listening to Gunshots Straight from the Hip. The views expressed are those of the host and guests and not reflective of any business entity or anyone associated with this broadcast. If you have any comments or want more information on how to be a sponsor, log on to our website at markgunmedia.com or call us at 502-407-0283. That's 502-407-0283. Thank you for listening.
Mark Gunn Media. No hype, no hoopla, just damn good work.